And a big part of what makes us very unique is we're not just the software, we're the thinking behind it, and then we're the systemologists. So I almost think of it like we're more like the Apple solution rather than the Microsoft solution. We've kind of got all of these integrated pieces around the software, the thinking, the support, the community, the training to create, hey, how do we go from I don't have any systems and processes in place to I now have the base level of systems and what we call minimum viable systems. That's really what you're looking to achieve.
Hello and welcome to Marketing Speak. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer. It's my pleasure to have David Jenyns with us. David is an experienced entrepreneur who sold the Melbourne Cricket Ground in his early 20s and founded Melbourne SEO Services. He systematized himself out of that business in 2016 and founded Systemology to help business owners implement systems to scale their business. Today, he supports a growing community of certified systemologists, delivers workshops, keynote addresses, hosts a podcast, and is on a mission to free business owners worldwide from daily operations. Dave has 2 books, Systemology and Authority Content. Dave, it's so great to have you on the show.
Really looking forward to the episode, Stephan. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, awesome. So we know each other from a couple of different things. One of them being Michael Gerber, and you were helping him. He's the author of the E-Myth, the E-Myth Revisited, and some other E-Myth books. Really profound books on how to build systems and create scale and go from an entrepreneur to a real business that can survive without the entrepreneur. So if you want to share maybe a little bit of background about how you got involved with Michael and how you came to have the E-Myth in your life and in your business, that'd be, I think, a fun start to this interview.
Yes, it really kind of came to the forefront for me just shortly after we found out we were pregnant, and I was right in the center of my digital agency working incredibly long hours. And I thought, I don't want to be that dad who's always too busy, who's not got time to hang out with the kids and always thinking about work. So I kind of intuitively knew systems and processes were important to build an agency that worked without you. And I had built up a lot of these assumptions, though, at that point, working in the digital agency for over 10 years. I thought, well, this business is a little bit different because Google's always updating its algorithms, and how can I put systems and processes in place because they'll get out of date? And we're a creative agency, so I thought my team's not going to follow systems and processes anyway, so what's the point of putting them into place? And I thought the business was too complex, and really I just built this business that heavily relied on me. And then when we found out we were pregnant, I started to test a lot of those assumptions, and over the course of 9 to 12 months, really focused in on the systems, promoting up a lady who became our CEO. I stepped out after we had our firstborn, took some time out, kind of reevaluated things, and she really took over from that point. And that gave me a chance to kind of just change my way of thinking about business and what was possible. And what was funny, in that little pocket of when that happened, I got an email completely out of the blue from Luzdelia Gerber. I didn't have any connection with her. I didn't even know her first name, but I knew the surname, Luzdelia. And Gerber, being Michael Gerber, she said, all the email said was call me. So I'm in Melbourne. She's obviously on the West Coast. So it was first thing for me, afternoon for her. I hopped on the phone and called her. And then she said, oh, look, I've come across your book launch, Authority Content. And I don't even know how I came across it. I just happened to be watching on YouTube. And before I knew it, I had headed down this rabbit hole. And I love the work that you're doing. And have you heard of my husband, Michael Gerber? And I said, oh, of course. I was a little bit starstruck at that point. And she said, well, he's coming up to wanting to launch the last book in the E-Myth series called Beyond the E-Myth. And for the first time, we don't want to go through HarperCollins. We would like to self-publish so that we could have control over the full rights. And I'm looking for someone who could help launch the books. and I launched the final book. And I said, well, I don't really do book launches. And she said, oh, I just love what you did. And can you do that for Michael? So at that point, we'd built up the business where Melissa was running the day-to-day operations. Took a little bit of time out for the family, for the firstborn. And then I dove straight into this project to do the book launch for Beyond the E-Myth. And that was just such a wild experience, working quite closely with Michael and the team. And the book launch was a really great success. And that kind of really helped to ignite my passion for systems and processes and small business, obviously getting immersed in the E-Myth world. And shortly after that, I kind of let Melissa keep running the digital agency. And that was the birth of Systemology.
And so what does Systemology do these days? Like what are your sweet spots?
Yeah, so we work with business owners, typically between about 5 staff and 30 staff, and it's before they have any real systems or processes in place, where the business owner is still across many of the different functions, and they are quite often the bottleneck, or maybe they've got some real key person dependency. And the work that we do is really to help them capture best practice. It's not about creating and inventing new systems. It's about going, who already does this task the best? Let's figure out what they're doing and then bring everybody up to that standard. And how do we apply the 80-20 rule and only identify the biggest, most impactful systems and go to work on those first? And then we work in a few different ways. Sometimes there's like an online program or a group program, or they work one-on-one. We've built out a network of what we call certified systemologists.
What's it take to get certified?
So it's you start off and it's a 3-month core training where you work quite closely with me, and we meet every week, and you get paired up with a buddy, and we have an online portal that teaches you all the material. And then when we meet for the live calls, it's more about facilitation, and meeting with the buddy is about like drilling and practicing and making sure that you feel confident with the material. That's kind of over the course of 3 months. And then once you know that, then you get a couple of case study clients, and then you apply the method to that particular business, and then you submit those for review, and then you get certified off the back of that. And then you're kind of part of our network, and we kind of introduce you into our world and feed leads and those sorts of things.
Awesome. And where does the book Systemology fit into your marketing, your funnel, and retention strategy too, for that matter?
I feel like the last 2 businesses for Melbourne SEO, which had authority content, and now Systemology, it's kind of like the linchpin for the business, in that it just articulates. It was a way for me to really clarify and simplify the work that we're doing, for whom, what the steps are. And it's a great way to kind of introduce people and say, hey, here's what we do. I'm going to reveal everything. I don't hold anything back. If you want, many people take and run with the book and implement that just in their business with no support. But then invariably, a lot of people start down the process and then go, oh, I'd like a little bit more help here, or how can I go a bit quicker? And then that, off the back end, we've got all the products and services to kind of help either the do-it-yourselfer, or the one who wants to work in a group, or someone who just wants it done for them. So it really is the center of all of our marketing now. Like, I focus heavily about how do I get the book into the hands of as many of our ideal clients as possible. Like, that's running Amazon ads, that's doing joint venture partners giving out books, that's running Facebook ads. It's all about getting the book out there, because that really is the best pre-sales tool we've got.
Yeah, and you've self-published it, so you have a lot more ability to use it in creative ways than if you had a traditional publisher.
Yeah, I think that was a big part when I was doing the work with Michael Gerber as well. Like, they wanted to maintain the rights, and that's always stuck with me. I did it with authority content, but I didn't really appreciate how important that is until I did Systemology. Because I'm a marketer, I can market really well, and I could do things and stretch the boundaries probably more than a lot of traditional publishers would be comfortable doing, and some authors who don't have that background. So I felt like I was primed to just go, well, I can take over that chunk that a lot of the traditional book publishers do, and then really drive it, and, free chapters and chopping it up into little bits and different ways we get endorsements out and the way that we did all of the pre-marketing and getting people on board, some of the things we would just not be able to do with traditional publishers.
So what would be some things that are more outside of the box or novel that you've done with either or both of your books, like with endorsements, with advertising and things like that, that wouldn't have happened if you had a traditional publisher?
I think the first thing with a lot of people that, and maybe this is starting to change, when they're working with a traditional publisher, some authors that I was chatting with, it's almost like they were expecting the publisher to do that work, when really publishers, they kind of want you to drive a lot of that. So I kind of went in knowing, well, I don't have that I can lean on, so I'm going to have to do all of this. So then it was about creating a full, complete marketing plan where we start off thinking about how do we engage an audience as early as possible and get them involved in reading pre-copies of the book and helping with the cover and figuring out what the tagline's going to be, and almost like a street team in a private Facebook group where we started to get very early engagement to get them on board and bought into the work that we were doing. So that way as well, the earlier you get people enrolled and they support that, then when time comes for the book launch, it's much easier for them to go, you know what, I am going to jump on Amazon and post that review, or I am going to share this into the different communities. So it definitely started probably about 4 or 5 months out of the book launch, just starting to build that and having the ability to send out these pre-release copies. I know with some of the traditional publishers, they're quite particular with letting early digital copies go out and watermarking, and they do a bunch of stuff sometimes that just introduces a little bit of extra friction, which then lowers the chance of getting some of those early adopters involved. So building that up, and then once you got that initial group, then starting to do the outreach to some of the bigger influencers. And you got to experience that firsthand when I was doing the work with Michael. We outreached to you and said, would you love to interview Michael and talk about the new book? And you're quite gracious to help out with that. But that next tier of thinking about, well, who are the key players and influencers that you can then start to connect with to kind of help get the word out. And then, you layer on, obviously there's some organic marketing there on some of the different channels on your social media. And then we also did some paid as well, where we would be running some Facebook ads, remarketing ads, and we did some YouTube stuff. And it's really just trying to fire a whole bunch of arrows, and then some of them will hit. And once you kind of get a little whiff of ones that are hitting, then you kind of double down and try and do a little bit more of that. But it was, you kind of feel like almost like you've got an orchestra going on and you've got the conductor up the front. You kind of do all this planning, and then when it comes down to launch day, it's kind of like, fire the arrows, fire the cannons, okay, send in the infantry. And it's that final little push. And then really the game is, at least with the book launch, you get enough attention on a book early, and then Amazon starts to notice, and then their algorithm kicks in, and then it says people who read this also read this, or they promote you out to segments of their database that says new and noteworthy, because you've kind of got over this hump. And that's a big part of what that pre-marketing's all about.
Yeah, and you've apparently done really well with Amazon. I'm quite impressed with 531 ratings and average of 4.6 stars. That's
yes, yeah.
That's pretty impressive. That's for Systemology, and it looks like you also have an Audible version of that. Did you narrate that yourself?
Yeah, I always find, for me personally, the audiobooks that I like most are the ones that are read by the author. So that always stuck in my head. So I did read it, and I was quite lucky to get Michael. He actually read the foreword to the book, and then there's a little cameo in there from Luz Delia as well. So the audio experience is quite a nice little journey as well. I think that the stats, and it's hard to know because we do Amazon ads, and I'm running ads to the main book, but the way that their ad engine works, the audiobook's separate, so sometimes it's a bit hard to see. But I would say, at least by sales, we're making just as many audiobook sales as we are physical book sales. So I think, that's been a really great medium. And a lot of people who listen to the audio, then when they outreach, I don't know, there's an extra level of connection that happens because they've heard my voice, and we've spent 5-6 hours together of me reading the book to them, and so it's definitely been another real key part to our marketing.
Yeah. How did you end up with so many reviews?
Combination of things. At the guts of it, you have to write an exceptional book. You can't really game the reviews and continue to game them if you've got an average book, because that kind of starts to show up and then bring your average down. And then so that's kind of step number one. Then step number two after that, obviously there's a big push at the start. And then where I think a lot of authors go wrong is that they sometimes abandon their books and they don't think about the marketing campaign that happens after the launch. They go to all of this work of writing the book. Some authors don't even think about the marketing plan after they've done the writing, but it really is a marathon, not a sprint. You write the book, you do the first market, and then you continue to market afterwards. So, we've got a couple of campaigns, like obviously being a systems person, we kind of narrowed down a handful of campaigns that we just run day in and day out to get book reviews. So things like outreaching to people who've reviewed business books and say, would you be interested in Systemology? I'll send you a copy. Or finding YouTubers that review books and sending them copies, and going to our databases. The database has grown, and continually going back to that well and asking, hey, have you posted this? If not, it's incredibly helpful. So it's just there's no shortcut here. It's just consistency. I think, that's probably the key, consistency.
Yeah. I really need to think about what you're saying here and in relation to what I'm launching here this year with my co-authors is the 4th edition of The Art of SEO. It's now in production, and I mean, I personally put in a lot of time in getting endorsements, but and we got a foreword from Joost de Valk, who's the creator of the Yoast SEO plugin. So I got that handled, but I don't have a launch strategy. I don't have a post-launch strategy. I don't have a whole bunch of people to outreach to for getting reviews for Amazon. This was just for the endorsements that go in the front matter of the book. I really need to think about this. Yeah, you've done a lot of good stuff with your books and with Michael Gerber's book. Yeah, clearly, I need to model some of this.
I've got a couple of videos where I walked through pre the launch and what the strategy looked like, and post. So I can send those over. They'll be quite helpful. That said, I mean, there are.
By the way, I'll include those, if you're happy for me to, in the show notes for this episode. So
yep, I'll send those over for sure. I think they'll be really helpful. They're quite behind the scenes. There are some books that don't have this launch strategy and still do incredibly well. Sometimes they're sleepers though, like they'll launch and it might take years before they take off. I think from memory, I need to double check this, but I think Influence, maybe by Robert Cialdini, was one of those where it kind of launched, it didn't kind of hit mainstream, and then it does. So it is possible to have something take off just by the audience. But really what I'm trying to do with the marketing thing is almost like light a fire underneath it to get it going. So now once you kind of reach a bit of critical mass, you make consistent organic sales on Amazon, and you kind of get a little bit of extra fuel for that, and it's good for positioning and things like that. So it's not necessarily a requirement for a book to do well, but I definitely think it gives it a nice launching pad, assuming it's a great book.
Yeah, that's great advice. So now you mentioned you did some Amazon advertising, Facebook advertising. I think you probably did some Google advertising as well. And
yes,
and YouTube.
Yep, some YouTube.
What kind of budget would you recommend to an author who's putting out a book that they aren't expecting to be a national bestseller, but maybe they want to sell more than just a few thousand copies. What kind of budget and how would you deploy it? Would a lot of it go towards Amazon, or would it be split evenly between all those platforms that we just mentioned? Or
It's funny. I think one of my biases, because I started off as an SEOer, I always used to default to free organic traffic. And it was only later in life that I was like, hey, paying money to get eyeballs is also a good strategy. So I'm always really conservative with my spend when it comes to running paid traffic. So definitely getting on Amazon and running ads to the book, it's great. I mean, it's a marketplace where book buyers are there and they're looking for books, and you can bid on similar and like books. So that's definitely a strategy there. It takes time to build up the campaign over there. Like, you'll start off with $500 a month, and then over time it'll get to $1,000. It's not like when you think of Google AdWords, where you can just, very quickly drop a huge budget. It's almost like the advertising engine is still pretty young and archaic, and you kind of have to scale up for it to really work. So from Amazon, I think, just slowly building it up, finding someone who can kind of work on that's how I'd approach that. For Facebook, the best, when we launched, we just kind of dropped money remarketing. We only did, I think it was maybe about $5 or $6 grand that we did remarketing through to an existing audience. And that was just to give the initial push and just to kind of get it on everybody's radar. But then we turned it off after the launch. And it wasn't until we built out a book funnel that we came back and we turned it back on. So we did the buy the book and we'll include worldwide shipping, and it was a really low cost. And then you buy the book, and then you once you do that, you get an upsell off the back end, and then that got them into a small home study course. Not that I needed it to be like a fully self-liquidating offer and profitable up front, but I didn't want to lose a truckload of cash. So it ended up working out after we got that book funnel going. And this is probably, we had the funnel, we've turned it kind of on and off, but it costs about $25 to $30 to sell a book. But that's also a good quality lead where we can then engage, get them into our funnel, and introduce them to other products and services. Similarly with YouTube, you can drop a lot of money very quickly on YouTube, and it is a little bit of a black hole, and it is a little bit of a branding thing. So generally for the book launch, I would only suggest a few grand, and again, it's just a remarketing play. Most of what I would suggest up front, rather than going to a cold audience, would mainly just go drop pixels everywhere, whether it's your Facebook pixel or you got your Google pixel, just so that you can at least hit people that are in your world. That's probably where I'd start. We dabbled a little bit with the LinkedIn ads, but LinkedIn ads were really expensive, and we didn't have a sales team properly firing to kind of really have that make much sense. So we never really explored that very far.
Yeah, we did not get any real returns from LinkedIn advertising when we tried it. It was really disappointing.
Twitter's the other one I might explore more these days, mainly just because Elon's shaking things up again, and I believe their advertising engine has gotten better, like you're able to target better. And there is a little bit of a buzz on there, assuming your audience is there. And I feel like, SEOs and marketers, Twitter's probably a good space for them.
Yeah, I like Twitter a lot more now that Elon's in charge. Apparently, there was a list of banned words from 2012 or something, and if any of those words were in a tweet, then the reach of that tweet was massively downgraded, and he removed that. Yeah, censorship was alive and well up until the moment that Elon bought the company.
Yeah, it's a great space now.
Yeah. By the way, do you know why he came in to the headquarters as soon as he bought the company, carrying a sink?
No, I remember seeing the photo though.
Okay, so I only just got it because he was interviewed by the Babylon Bee, and they talked about it. It's a pun. Let that sink in, right?
Love it. He's like the ultimate troll.
Yeah, he's pretty awesome. Anyway, so yeah, I haven't personally tried Twitter advertising, but I'm open to it. What about lowering the price of the ebook version on Amazon for a period of time, like to 99 cents? Did you do anything like that?
Yes, we did that. I'm pretty sure we did that for Michael's launch. I'd need to go back through my notes. There was a period at the start because for him, it was about reach and getting it into as many hands as possible for that initial launch. I'm pretty sure we did that on launch just to help with the new and noteworthy status. I'm trying to remember. I don't think I did it for authority content, and I think we also did it for systemology. So it's definitely a strategy I would look towards. I definitely think in that start just kind of gets you a little bit more excitement, buzz, bit of a reason as to why to act now, because you can put a deadline on when that happens. It's 99 cents for the next week. There's a lot of debate initially on whether or not we should do free for the period. That's another option, but it's not my recommendation to do free for launch, because I see some people do that, but I believe they've got two listings when it comes to the rankings where free books are separate from paid books, and ultimately you're going to go to a paid book anyway, and long term you want to be ranking and have all of your stats on the paid side as opposed to the free side.
Yeah. So what are some of the strategies and tactics that worked for your book launch and post launch and for Michael's that also can work well for promoting your podcast?
Yes, yeah. For the podcast, I had our business process simplified podcast and we ran it for a little bit. The way that I used to do it is I would run a summit and I'd do like 50 interviews all in one, and then we would drip it out over the course of a year. So we'd kind of like have the big event, and then that would become the feeder into what the podcast was. And it was about the start of COVID or thereabouts. My podcast, we pretty much just have taken a holiday for the last few years now. And I'm kind of just starting now thinking about reactivating it. And as I start to think about ways that will promote that, I think thinking about where the listeners are, like it's how we connected is we had a colleague that recommended us, and I'm popping up on other podcasts. So definitely if you've got a podcast, appearing on other podcasts and where your similar audience are, so that way you can reference, I've got a podcast where it makes sense. I think and even some swaps can work quite well. Like the work that we're doing at the moment is on YouTube, and I'm just starting to think about this. So it's early days marketing strategy, not confirmed, but thinking about other similar podcast or YouTube channels that are similar in size, maybe similar in audience, and basically getting them to interview me to interview them. That's a strategy that will probably head down. But I don't have, I'm trying to think of particular strategies from the book launch that
Well, like
might
for
work
example,
well.
doing some Facebook ads like you did for the book.
Yeah.
You might do it for podcast episodes. I personally have not done any paid advertising for my podcast. I don't have a direct funnel that takes a podcast listener and turns them into a client, and so it's feels like a kind of a waste of money.
Yeah, I did it once. So I engaged an agency here in Australia to run ads for our podcast, and we did it for about 3 months. And the work that they did is they took the episode, chopped it up into little pieces, and we had, little bite-sized snippets of different episodes. Then they would write ads, run them through Facebook, and they would basically custom write each ad using the different interviews to identify different hooks. And then they were basically going into these cold audiences. The way that they measured success for us was showing us the growth in our listeners, because we could kind of measure that. the only thing is nothing happens in a vacuum. And we were also doing other marketing, and I'm emailing my list, and we've got the book, and we've got a bunch of different things where it was hard to isolate and say, the reason for the growth in this podcast is because of the work that the agency was doing. And then, similar to you, it's kind of like we started to think about, well, who's listening to this, and are we going to get some sort of measurable ROI from the effort? And I found a lot of existing clients and people already in the world loved it, and they would listen to the podcast, and it was a great way for almost like continued engagement and keeping us in our world. But I wasn't as convinced about how it was going, reaching new audiences, getting them in, and then encouraging them to buy. And it just I came down to the end where it was so grey that they couldn't measure it properly other than this one number on growth. And I was kind of like, well, that's not enough. We're spending, a few $1,000s every month, and we've been running it for a little while here, and I'm not seeing anything that I could confidently say, yes, this is working. So then we ended up abandoning it.
Yeah, makes sense. If you could kind of walk our listener through how you came up with the name Systemology and actually also authority content.
Yes.
I know your story about authority content because I watched your interview with the founder of Founder Magazine.
Yes, Nathan. Yeah.
But yeah, if our listener could hear that, I think that'd be a fun story.
With the authority content, and I almost feel like there are two different strategies here. Like authority content, like at the time I was knee deep in SEO world, and I'm thinking about exact match domain names and what people are going to be searching. And that was like the biggest influence, I think, with the authority content stuff. Whereas when you think about it, Systemology, it's a very different strategy. It was quite brandable, and I liked the way that it rolled off the tongue. I liked the way I could put a definition in on what this word is around, the study of systems and processes in organizations and organizational efficiency. So I kind of liked that part of it. And I was really thinking about branding. And then I had a colleague of mine who we were bouncing around some names, and he just happened to throw out Systemology. He threw out another one, Methodology. And then we just kind of played around with a few of these different names. And quite oftentimes once I find a name like this, I feel like it's such an important piece to the business. And from a marketing perspective, like I'll go out and then seek out the domain name. Sometimes I'm lucky and it's not taken, but sometimes I'll have to go out and, pay $5,000 or $10,000 for the domain name. But if it's so central, and I know, well, I'm going to write a book off the back of this, and it's going to be central to the way that I build this business, and we are going to be saying this word all the time, that's what makes me think it's really important. I want it to stick in people's heads. And for the word Systemology, then I'm able to play around with things like systemologists. So we certify people, and then our systemologists love to say, I'm a systemologist, and they kind of bonds them to the brand and our work, and it's kind of helps them say, I am, which then becomes a real part of their identity. So yeah, there's a bit of thought that kind of went through that, and then we just landed on Systemology and did the research, got the domain name. Can't remember exactly how much I paid for that. It was taken, and I spent at least a few $1,000s to get it. In hindsight, I love it, and it's something that I'll be able to, sing from the rooftops for years to come.
Authority content, you had to buy the .com aftermarket as well, so somebody owned it already?
Yes, and I know because that book is coming up to about 7 years old, and I would have bought the domain name a little bit, so I can't remember the exact details of what I paid for it and how I found it. I played around with things like content authority and authority content, and I was quite lucky, just fortuitous. I happened to get authority content just before Google made a whole bunch of changes and rolled out all of that expertise, authority, and trust. So I got that just before Google launched that. So then it kind of fit really well in with the brand to kind of say, Google's talking about this stuff. You want to be building authority and expert positioning. So it was just, right timing, thinking about the right thing, landed on it, got the domain name. Google came out with their thing, and I was able to kind of own that a little bit. I probably didn't push it as hard as I could, because I really think that's probably a category we properly could have owned, because we were quite early to market with our thinking in that space.
That's very cool. And then how do you incorporate AI into what you're doing? Because systemology, building systems, and systemizing the activities, entire company, and it's something that I imagine is going to be pretty revolutionized by generative AI. So what are you doing with that?
There's a whole bunch of thinking I'm doing in this space, because I try and think, that classic skate where the puck is going, not where it is. And I think about our systemologists, and I think about how do we make sure that we stay in front of what's happening? Because very quickly, the documentation of systems and processes could get commoditized, and you can already take transcripts of recorded systems and processes and feed them into ChatGPT and have it help to generate some of the process. So part of the work that the systemologist does, like when we think about systems, it's more than just having a documented process. You actually need to build a culture, because unless the team are following the systems, unless this is how we do things here, that doesn't matter anyway. So for the systemologist, we're focusing more and more in on how do we build that culture piece, because that helps to protect the work that we do there, regardless of what AI does. That said, though, we also need to heavily lean into AI, and I feel like there is a bit of a sweet spot, because with the right team members, AI makes them work more quickly and more efficiently. And then if you layer in systems as well, like what is a system? When I talk about systems and processes, it's a step-by-step sequence to get things done. And we talk about identifying the key systems in a business, identifying the 80-20. What are the key ones that really drive? And then we double down on generating those systems. Now, those systems are step-by-step documents on how things are done. So in time, as AI gets smarter, those systems really could quite possibly become prompts for the AI to execute things. So a systemologist is almost like a prompt engineer, where at the moment you've got the team member who's doing the execution, because maybe the AI isn't quite there just yet, but you will still need someone to identify what are the essential systems, what needs to be done, how do we kind of break that down into a process, and then that can be fed in somewhere. And then already chunks of those systems are now getting executed by AI. So obviously with authority content, that's an area I've done a lot of thinking around and created systems and processes, and AI is absolutely ripe and prime to disrupt the way that we do our authority content. So authority content in a nutshell is run some sort of event, a webinar or a live workshop or something, chop that event up into lots of little pieces. So you've got video and audio from it, then syndicate it across the web, load it to YouTube, get it all over your socials, send it out into your email. Now there's all of the marketing, the content, the copywriting piece that is perfect for AI to step in, because you chop out one of these videos, you take the transcript, and then with the right pre-prompting, and that's really the secret with things like ChatGPT, is you want to use pre-prompting to really say, hey, ChatGPT, this is my target audience, this is my writing style, these are my values. Now I want you to listen to or read the transcript from this video, and I need you to write me 3 tweets that hit different market appeals that speak to the target audience that I've just identified for you. So by doing that sort of stuff, we've been able to accelerate, and you'll see it on our YouTube channel. We're just picking up the momentum and speed at which we're putting out really high quality content. You still need someone to sit over the top though. Like AI at the moment, and maybe this will change, is really kind of like an apprentice or a university student. And you kind of need to guide them and direct them and tell them exactly what it is that you want. And that's not quite what I wanted. Can you have another go? Can you try rewriting this? Oh, can you make sure that you put a few more emojis in? Oh, I need some hashtags in there as well. So you need a quality team member to sit over the top to be able to look at the output and then ask for the refinements. But what we have done is created a great system for authority content where a virtual assistant can come in, follow a bunch of prompts, pre-populate a Google document, which is 80% of the way there. And then the copywriter steps in and does the final 20% just to make sure it's all nice and tidy and ready for publication and get our thumbnails done and those sorts of things. So now that I've proven to myself that that can be done, now I've started to go, well, where else in our business can I apply this same type of thinking? Like, content just makes sense for me and it was obvious, but I do realize when you're holding a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and I'm a marketing guy. So I go to ChatGPT and ask it marketing questions. But I know there are, if you come to it with a different mindset, you're going to be asking different questions. And I've already started to see that with my systems brain. I ask it different questions, but there's probably other areas, HR and finance and management and other areas that we haven't yet fully explored. So I'm getting excited by the area and how systems fits into it. Still exploring it.
Yeah. Seems like maybe there's an opportunity to have a ChatGPT plugin, a Systemology plugin.
Yes. Yeah. If you know any developers.
Right. So just an example of a plugin, the show notes plugin. So you feed it the episode that you need show notes for, and it will turn that episode into a show notes page with timestamps and kind of the main topics that were covered at each of those timestamps and a whole synopsis of the episode and key learning points, all that sort of stuff. Just, so you could accomplish that with a really good prompt, but to have it as a plugin, I think it makes it easier. So you could apply this kind of thinking to what you do with Systemology and like, all right, so we're going to put a lot of smarts into our ChatGPT plugin, and that will also help protect your IP, because if you just share a bunch of prompts in a PDF document, it's like, all right, well, thanks, see ya. Something to think about.
I love that. I will explore that, because we have got quite a lot of IP around our approach to systems generation and thinking, and a lot of work that the systemologists do. I think that would be a great idea.
Do you have any relationships with other organizations, partnerships like with, let's say, waywedo.com? Because they have a lot of standard operating procedures that they've documented.
I have a few colleagues in the space where it's almost like, seemingly from the outside looking in, you would go, their competition. But kind of behind the scenes, we'll have informal catch-ups, what's working, what's not, kind of a little bit of a trading story. So I do have a little bit of that. We happen to develop a SaaS platform called System Hub, which is a place to store your systems and your processes. So that's called systemhub.com. But that really fits into the ecosystem. And a big part of what makes us very unique is we're not just the software, we're the thinking behind it, and then we're the systemologists. So I almost think of it like we're more like the Apple solution rather than the Microsoft solution. We've kind of got all of these integrated pieces around the software, the thinking, the support, the community, the training to create, hey, how do we go from I don't have any systems and processes in place to I now have the base level of systems and what we call minimum viable systems. That's really what you're looking to achieve. And that I think is a big part of what makes us very unique. Like the software in its own, someone just doesn't need another tool. It's funny though. I mean, that's where people get started. They sit there and they think, if I get this software to have my systems and processes, I'm going to be a systemized organization. And then very quickly they just realize it was a shiny object and there's a lot more to building a systems driven company than having your SOPs in a folder somewhere. And that's the reality once someone really gets into it.
Are you familiar with the Building a Second Brain book, Forte?
Yes. Yeah. I watched a YouTube summary of that. I haven't read the book. I think he uses a lot of Notion, maybe, if I remember correctly, or maybe Evernote.
Well, it's more tool agnostic. So he's got a whole set of frameworks. There's the code framework, the para framework, and so forth. And so, yeah, you could use Notion, or you could use Evernote, or you could use Rome. And there's different use cases for different things. So a to-do manager, he might use Things by Cultured Code, but to capture notes, he might use Notion. To keep track of bookmarks, he might use Readwise and Reader, the Reader app from Readwise. So it's a whole methodology that's really good. I just interviewed him for the second time this week. Yesterday, in fact, I interviewed him. I had him on a few years ago prior to him releasing the Building a Second Brain book. I think it was 2019 was that interview. This was on my other podcast on Get Yourself Optimized. Really good stuff. So I highly recommend his book and his course. He's got a foundational course, and he also does a membership site with regular ongoing cohorts. So you can take his course in a more interactive environment with trainers who teach the different aspects. It's really good, really worth checking out.
There's definitely a few different pieces. Like I kind of grew up underneath the David Allen school of getting things done, and one central.
So did I, and actually so did Tiago, and we talked ad infinitum about that. Like the waiting fors and the someday maybes, and the next actions projects versus areas of focus, etc. Yep. Yeah, good stuff.
Almost like just getting it out of your brain. I think there's almost two pieces the way that I like to think about it. One, it's just get it out of your brain and down somewhere so you create space to think. And then the second bit, I don't focus as much about the getting it out of your brain and validating, as a business owner or entrepreneur, validating ideas, because you kind of have the idea, you have to run with it to the point at which you kind of get it to a bit where it's proven and it's worth making recurring. So it's almost like that's get it out of your brain, and oftentimes they're once-off related tasks. And then I think of it a little bit further down the track, which is when do we need to make it repeatable and delegatable, and kind of identifying and capturing from that big pool of everything to then go, well, what are the things that are worthy of pulling out of that pile and then potentially delegating down and making it consistent. That's where I do a lot of my work.
That's really good. I have my strength is getting stuff out of my head, because as David Allen said, I'm sure you probably heard this from him, that your brain is meant to be a factory, not a warehouse.
Yes. Yeah. Love that quote. I haven't heard it for years. It was spot on.
So I don't want to remember to pick up the milk kind of, scenario. I want to not remember, but have my brain free to ideate and strategize and problem solve and create. So that's not going to happen as well if I'm juggling a whole bunch of to-dos that are in my head, not in a trusted system. So that's where I excel, is getting it into a trusted system. Where I fall down is where I then take that trusted system and I process the actions and decide, is this a project or an area of focus or a next action or someday maybe, or waiting for, who do I assign it to, what kind of deadline, what's the context, right? So that's a big thing about GTD.
Have you read Rocket Fuel
Gino Wickman.
by Gino Wickman?
I haven't read it, but I
Yeah.
had Gino on my other podcast, Get Yourself Optimized.
Yeah.
Do you recommend the book?
I mean, it's a lot about the yin and the yang. He talks about it as a visionary and an integrator. Michael Gerber talks about it as the manager and the leader. It's trying to figure out who is that yin to your yang, because what you talked about there is, very common with business owners, founders, visionaries, big picture thinkers. And it's, trying to figure out what is the interface with going from idea to handoff to execution, and then passing that responsibility. But that's kind of the age-old challenge for the person who has fantastic ideas. And I bet for you as well, they don't stop. You probably have ideas all the time. So it's yeah. The more you clear it out, the more space you create for the next great idea.
I have over 5,000 items in my to-do list.
Yeah. Wow.
It's a bit crazy. It's certainly untenable and not workable. So I do have to winnow that down. But I could declare to-do list bankruptcy, but to this point, I cringe every time I think about doing that. So.
Well, there'd be so much gold in there as well. Like, I'm sure there'd be some noise, but and some consolidation here or there, but you wouldn't want to get rid of the gold nuggets in there either.
A bit of a pack rat when it comes to my ideas. Anyway, so I know we're running out of time. Like, maybe to wrap things up, if you could share some examples of things that, from a marketing perspective, that you and your team of systemologists were able to systematize in terms of recurring marketing activities. What would some of those things be, and some of the results that you might achieve from doing so?
Yeah. I think with marketing in particular, I find a lot of people think that it's a creative endeavor and they're reinventing themselves with every new campaign that comes out, and they're running a particular thing, and next month they're on to the next thing. So they don't really get the lifetime value. And depending on the size of the team, sometimes when a company gets busy, they stop thinking about marketing because they're doing the work. And then when the work dries up, then they start thinking about marketing, at which point it's too late. So I see marketing as a function that needs to happen 24/7. And the only real way to do that is to identify some core strategies and then get the systems and processes dialed in, and then have a team member whose responsibility it is to execute on that. Now, every business is a little bit different when it comes to what are those strategies going to be. We always start with, well, what's currently working and how do we make those repeatable? Where are you getting leads at the moment? And then who does that when it's happening? Let's watch what they're doing and then create the process from that. Sometimes that's LinkedIn outreach and connecting with people through LinkedIn. Sometimes it's an outreach strategy to get someone onto a podcast. Sometimes it's the creation of the podcast and getting a guest and the whole production of that and syndication of that. Sometimes it's content marketing. Sometimes some of the systems where, if you're working with an external provider, let's say you may be engaging someone to do your AdWords, or maybe you're engaging someone to do some Facebook ads, and it's slightly outside of your core. We don't tend to over systemize those because, that's the job of the contractor that you're employing. But what you might systemize is your interface and engagement with that contractor. So you're going to have a monthly meeting with them. What is it that you talk about on that monthly meeting? How do you determine if they're successful or not? That might become a little system that you bottle. So it is a matter of, when the systemologists work with the client, they identify what's working and then they double down. And that can be really, really varied. It can be anything from running trade shows to advertising in newsletters. Like there are just so many different marketing strategies and little nuances depending on industry and depending on the strength of the business and what positioning they've got and those sorts of things. So, I mean, I can cherry pick a couple of strategies that we use internally, but even, like I said, for clients' perspective, it's hugely varied.
So what's an example of something internally that you've systematized?
Yeah. So, obviously, the authority content one is a real big chunk we just talked about. Another one that we do is we kind of like have these campaigns where we identify a target list of people that meet a certain criteria of something that we want to do. So there's the systematization of the generation of that list of people. So let's say it might be podcast outreach to get onto other people's podcasts, where we have a certain list that we build of that, and that's a little system in itself. Then there's the system of writing the outreach emails or the messaging that's going to go. Then there's the actual systemization of the execution of that, where those first messages are sent and then someone has to monitor that inbox. So the first bit's all systemized, building the list, doing the outreach, that first message, but then you need the real human on the back end of that once those responses start coming in to engage and respond. But once you get that, just that as a strategy and understanding those pieces, you can then actually plug in anything. Like I said, podcast outreach there, but maybe it's celebrity outreach. Maybe it's YouTube video blogger outreach. Maybe it's like you've really, once you figure out that system, you can plug anything in, and you then start to go. Oftentimes we'll test 2 or 3 campaigns and we'll go, "Ooh, this one's working. Let's now chunk this out and let's always do this." So for example, the podcast outreach for us is now a system that we just kind of run consistently because we tested it in that initial phase and it worked and it was good for us. Well, now let's do it all the time. And it's about collecting those type of campaigns.
Right. And I would imagine that with regards to podcasts, that you could systematize in the prospecting part of this for which shows you want to get on, looking at other very prevalent or prominent guests who are on so many other shows, like John Lee Dumas, who gets on tons of shows when he's promoting a new book. You could kind of reverse engineer all the shows that these folks have gotten on, and then pull from those the ones that would be a good fit for your target client avatar, and toss out the rest. And that could then be aggregated and categorized and prioritized, and there you go. There's a system.
I love the way that you think. I mean, that's dead on. And then the extra little magic that you can sprinkle over the top for that is if you then happen to know the influencer and they're okay for you to outreach and say, hey, like I've done that with a few colleagues where, like Mike Rhodes, let's say from Web Savvy here in Australia, he does a lot of podcasting, and he was on a lot of podcasts. It was then
he was on this show.
We could build that list. And then you can outreach and say, hey, I was chatting with Mike, and Mike suggested I outreach. Mm-hmm. There's little, slight tweaks to that then, move it just from feeling like it's spam cold outreach to, hey, I've got a reason why I'm reaching out here. And then you can kind of go from there.
That is a great tip. Awesome. Well, this was a fabulous way to end the episode. If our listener or viewer wants to get systematized, systemologized, where do we send them? And also, if they want to read either or both of your books, and maybe even hire your agency that I know you're not personally a part of, but the SEO firm. So where do we send them?
Best place would be Amazon. I think, as we said right at the start, the book's our best introduction to what we do. And if you're listening to this, you're probably an audio person. So head over to Audible, check out the book Systemology. And then if you want to go a bit deeper, just the website, systemology.com. There's links to the YouTube channel, the podcast, the other bits and pieces. And if you need a hand, we can help. That said, though, everything's in the book, so you can just run with the book. It's full and complete.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Dave. And thank you, listener. Apply this stuff. Don't just sit passively and be entertained or edutained. Put it into practice. We'll catch you in the next episode. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.